the first thing I heard was not the pump, or the cattle, or Vanessa Caldwell screaming from behind her white Lexus. It was the soft, expensive hiss of a $120,000 swimming pool realizing it had been built on the wrong man's pasture. At sunrise, the whole thing looked like some kind of rich person's mistake dropped out of the sky and landed in the middle of Whitaker Ranch. Blue tile, glass fencing, stone pavers, chrome handrails, the kind of pool you see behind houses with wine cellars and three-car garages. Except this one was sitting 50 yards past my old barbed wire line, surrounded by hoof prints, wet Bermuda grass, and 200 head of black Angus cattle drinking from the cleanest water they had seen all summer. The air smelled wrong. Chlorine and cowhide. Fresh mud and cut stone. That sharp swimming pool bite riding on top of the warm, grassy breath of animals that had no idea they were standing in the middle of a neighborhood amenities project. The pump was still running, groaning in that high electric whine, pushing water through a temporary white PVC line that ran from the deep end straight to my cattle troughs like it had been designed that way from the start. It had not. Vanessa had designed that pool to erase my pasture. By morning, it was watering my herd. My name is Caleb Whitaker, and I am not a developer, not a lawyer, not one of those men who wears polished shoes and calls land an asset class. I am 42 years old, third-generation cattleman, owner of 63 acres outside Stillwater, Oklahoma, and most days my work smells like diesel, hay dust, mineral blocks, and rain that may or may not come. That pasture did not look like much to people like Vanessa. Rusted gates, sagging fence wire, a dented stock tank, one red-handled valve beside the hay shed, and a stretch of ground my grandfather bought back when this whole county still knew the difference between a ranch and a subdivision. But to me, that field was not empty land. It was the lung of the ranch. It was where my father taught me to read storm clouds, where my daughter learned to bottle feed a calf, where every underground water line had been placed with a purpose and paid for. With work nobody in Silver Pines HOA would ever understand. They saw open grass and thought opportunity. I saw deed lines, water rights, and 3 generations of my family's fingerprints pressed into the dirt. Vanessa Caldwell saw something else entirely. She saw an eyesore beside her perfect new community. She saw cattle lowering property values. She saw money sitting behind an old fence. And 3 days before that sunrise, while I was in Amarillo buying replacement heifers, she made the kind of decision arrogant people make when nobody has ever told them no and meant it. She built her pool on my land. What she did not know was that the prettiest part of her new resort sat directly on top of the protected livestock water corridor my father registered with the county in 1989. And that red-handled valve she ignored beside my hay shed was about to become the quietest judge she would ever meet. 3 days before that sunrise, Whitaker Ranch still sounded like itself. The wind moved through the Bermuda grass in long, dry waves. The old wind chime on my porch clicked against the screen door. Somewhere near the back fence, a cow bawled for her calf, and the answer came soft and low from the shade line by the cottonwoods. I remember standing at the kitchen sink that morning, rinsing coffee grounds out of my mug, watching dust lift off the pasture road in little brown ghosts. August in Oklahoma does not ask permission. It just settles over you, heavy and hot, until your shirt sticks to your back before 7 in the morning. The cattle had already been working the North Trough hard because we had gone 22 days without real rain. That red-handled valve beside the hay shed was part of our backup system, tied into an underground livestock line my father put in after the drought of 1988 nearly broke him. He used to say water was not a convenience on a ranch. Water was the difference between a bad month and losing everything. My father, Daniel Whitaker, was not a sentimental man. He had hands like fence posts and a voice that could calm a nervous horse without raising volume. But when it came to land, he treated every survey marker like scripture. He kept our papers in a green metal file box under the workbench, wrapped in plastic, sorted by year, with notes in pencil along the edges. Deeds, easements, grazing leases, pipe maps, well permits, county stamps. He taught me early that a man who owns land but does not know his paperwork is just renting trouble from the future. I thought about him that morning because I was heading to Amarillo for a small cattle sale, and I had checked the water twice before leaving. The North Trough was flowing clean. The south gate was chained. The pasture fence that bordered Silver Pines was standing, tired but solid, 3 strands of barbed wire with cedar posts my grandfather had set by hand. On the other side of that fence sat a neighborhood so new the sidewalks still looked too white. Silver Pines had gone up in 18 months, all stone fronts, black roofs, matching mailboxes, and little flags stuck in flower beds by a landscaping company that arrived every Thursday like a military unit. Vanessa Caldwell was their president, their unofficial queen, and the kind of woman who could make a compliment feel like a warning. I had met her 2 months earlier when she walked up my gravel drive in cream-colored slacks and sunglasses big enough to hide half her face. Her perfume reached me before her voice did, sweet and sharp, fighting with the smell of hay and manure and losing. She smiled at my boots like they had offended her personally. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "we need to discuss the visual transition between your property and our community." I told her the transition was called a fence. She did not laugh. Instead, she looked past me at the cattle, the trough, the old hay shed, and the red-handled valve sticking out of the dirt like a warning flag nobody wanted to read. Then she opened a leather folder and showed me a glossy rendering of a wellness area with lounge chairs, decorative stone, and a pool so blue it looked fake even on paper. I handed it back and told her my land was not for sale. Her smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around the folder. "Some views," she said softly, "need to be improved whether people cooperate or not." I should have listened harder to that sentence. I should have heard the machinery hiding inside it. By the time I reached Amarillo, the sun had burned the morning soft right out of the sky. The sale barn smelled like dust, hot metal, fried onions from the concession stand, and cattle packed shoulder to shoulder under rusted fans. I spent most of that first day leaning against pipe rails, watching replacement heifers move through the ring while the auctioneer rattled numbers faster than rain on a tin roof. My phone buzzed twice around noon, both calls from a number I did not recognize. I let them go. Out there, strange numbers usually mean extended warranty scams, feed dealers, or somebody trying to buy land for half of what it is worth. The third call came just after 4, while I was loading paperwork into my glove box. This time, it was my neighbor, Ray Donnelly, who lived half a mile down the county road and had been retired from the fire department long enough to know when something smelled wrong. "Caleb," he said, and his voice had that careful edge people use when they are trying not to make bad news worse. "You expecting equipment at your place?" The air inside my truck seemed to go still. "What kind of equipment?" "Skid steer, dump truck, cement forms, maybe a trencher. They are working along your east pasture." I heard a backup alarm through the phone then, faint and sharp, that steady beep, beep, beep that makes every rancher think of torn-up ground and broken promises. Ray said there were men in bright vests, a portable toilet near the fence line, and a white Lexus parked where no Lexus had any business being. I asked if the fence was still up. He went quiet for 1 second too long. "Part of it is down," he said. "Looks like they pulled posts." I felt my jaw tighten until my molars hurt. Then I heard a woman's voice in the background, crisp and pleased, carrying through Ray's open window like she owned the wind. "Tell them to keep the stone pallets on the ranch side. The community opening is Saturday." Ranch side. Those 2 words followed me all the way back to the motel. I called the sheriff's office from the parking lot, standing beside a vending machine that hummed like an old transformer. The deputy who answered was polite, tired, and not nearly alarmed enough. He told me if there was a property line disagreement with contractors, I should come in with documentation when I got back. Documentation. I had documentation stacked in that green metal box at home, but that did not help while strangers were cutting into my ground under an Oklahoma sunset. I called Vanessa next. She answered on the second ring, like she had been waiting for me. Her voice was smooth as polished marble. "Mr. Whitaker, I was wondering when you would reach out." I asked her what she was doing on my pasture. She gave a small laugh, not loud, just enough to let me know she had an audience. "We are completing a long overdue community improvement in the transitional buffer." I told her there was no buffer. There was my fence, my grass, my water line, and her mistake. The pause that followed was colder than the motel air conditioner blowing against my neck. "Caleb," she said, dropping the polite mister like a coat she was tired of wearing, "undeveloped frontage next to a residential community creates legal maintenance concerns. Silver Pines has every right to correct neglected conditions affecting homeowners." That was when I heard papers sliding near her phone. She wanted me to hear them. She wanted me to picture forms, stamps, signatures, all the little theater props people use when they are stealing with clean hands. I drove back the next morning instead of staying for the second sale day. 6 hours on the highway with coffee turning bitter in my stomach and my hands locked at 10 and 2. When I turned onto my county road, I smelled it before I saw it. Wet concrete. Diesel. Fresh-cut cedar posts. Then the east pasture opened in front of me, and for a moment, I I did not recognize my own land. The fence was gone for nearly 80 feet. Survey flags had been replaced with orange contractor stakes. My grass was scraped down to red dirt. And in the middle of the wound, workers were laying blue tile around a hole shaped like money. I parked at the edge of the torn fence and sat there for maybe 10 seconds, maybe a full minute, with the engine ticking under the hood and my pulse beating in my ears. The pasture that had always opened wide and rough under the Oklahoma sky now looked like a construction brochure had crashed into it. There were pallets of limestone stacked where my cattle usually bedded down in the shade. Rolls of sod sat baking in the heat, like green carpet waiting for a house that did not exist. A trench ran from the pool shell toward my hay shed, a raw line of dirt aimed straight at the old water system my father built with his own hands. I stepped out of the truck and the smell hit harder. Wet cement, cut PVC, diesel exhaust, and that sour chemical bite of pool sealant. My boots sank into mud that had no reason to be there. One of the workers looked up from smoothing mortar and gave me a quick nod, the kind a man gives when he assumes you belong there, but does not know why. I asked for the foreman. A thick man in a neon vest walked over holding a clipboard and a bottle of sports drink. He glanced at my truck, then at my face, then at the pasture behind me like he was calculating how much trouble had just arrived. I told him this was private ranch land. He looked uncomfortable, which told me he knew enough to be nervous, but not enough to stop. "Sir," he said, "we are contracted through Silver Pines Community Association. All approved. All permitted." He tapped the clipboard with 2 fingers. I asked to see the permit. He showed me a work order with the Silver Pines logo, Vanessa Caldwell's signature, and a description that made my mouth taste like pennies. Recreational water feature and landscape enhancement within shared transitional buffer. I read it twice. Shared. That word sat there like a tick. I handed the clipboard back and told him there was no shared anything on that side of the fence. He shrugged without wanting to shrug. I just build what they pay me to build. Behind him, a younger worker was fitting a white pipe into the trench, and I saw exactly where it was pointed. Not toward Silver Pines. Not toward their manicured pump house. Toward my red-handled valve. I walked fast enough that the foreman called after me. The dirt around the valve had been disturbed. Somebody had scraped away the grass and exposed the old junction box. The lid was open. Fresh fingerprints streaked the dust. A new reducer had been fitted where no reducer belonged. Bright white plastic against my father's old galvanized line. That pipe was not just trespassing. It was drinking. I could hear the faint hiss of water moving underground, quiet but steady, like the pasture was whispering what Vanessa had done. Then her Lexus rolled up from the subdivision side, clean tires crunching over my torn fence line as if it were a driveway. Vanessa Caldwell stepped out wearing a pale blue blouse, white pants, and sunglasses that reflected my own ruined pasture back at me in 2 small, curved pieces. She carried the same leather folder from our first meeting. This time, she did not bother pretending to be neighborly. "Caleb," she said, "you are creating confusion for these workers." I looked past her at the pool, at the trench, at the place where cedar posts had been pulled from the ground and tossed aside like dead branches. "You cut my fence." She smiled like I had mentioned the weather. "The fence was encroaching on community transition space. You dug into my water line. Temporary utility access, pending final infrastructure review. You are building on my pasture." Her smile thinned. "According to updated plat clarification, this area falls inside the Silver Pines buffer zone." She opened the folder and slid out a color map, laminated, clean, expensive. My land was shaded in soft green, labeled Future Shared Amenity Corridor. It looked official enough to scare anyone who had not grown up with county records stacked under a workbench. She wanted the paper to do the lying for her. I looked at the fake line, then at her perfect nails holding the edge of the map. "Vanessa," I said, "my grandfather set those corner pins before your subdivision had a name." She tilted her head. "And communities evolve." That was when the sheriff's deputy arrived. Young man, clean uniform, polite eyes, already wishing he had been sent anywhere else. Vanessa turned toward him before I could speak, voice suddenly sweet enough to pour over pancakes. "Deputy, thank goodness. Mr. Whitaker is interfering with approved community construction." I showed him the torn fence. She showed him the laminated map. I pointed to the trench. She showed him a letter from a private survey company. I said the land was mine. She said the matter had been clarified through proper channels. The deputy rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the pool, then at the contractors, then at the papers in his hand. "Mr. Whitaker," he said carefully, "this appears to be a civil property dispute. You may need to address it through the county or the court. Vanessa's smile returned full strength. I heard the pump kick on behind me for a test cycle, a low electric hum pushing through stolen pipe. The sound ran under her next words like a warning bell. Some people fight progress, she said. Others learn to live beside it. I looked at the red valve, then at the fresh pipe, then at the cattle gathering near the far trough, waiting on water that had started running thin. My father's voice came back, so clearly it almost felt like he was standing beside me in the heat. Land does not argue. Paper does. So I stopped arguing. That night, I sat in the hay shed with the green metal file box open on my lap and dust floating through the flashlight beam like old memories. Outside, the ranch had gone quiet in that heavy summer way, except for the distant cough of a generator from the pool site and the restless shifting of cattle near the dry trough. Every few minutes, one of them would bawl low into the dark, and the sound pressed against my ribs harder than Vanessa's fake map ever could. A rancher can tolerate a lot of things. Bad prices, broken equipment, weather that lies. But when animals start waiting on water that should already be there, patience turns into math. I pulled out my father's folders one at a time. His handwriting was still on the tabs, blocky and practical. Deed, easement, well permit, livestock corridor. The paper smelled like cardboard, machine oil, and the peppermint gum he used to chew when he stayed up late balancing feed bills. My hands were dirty, but I touched those pages like they were family photographs. There it was, tucked behind a yellowed county survey from 1989, an agricultural water use registration stamped by Payne County, signed by my father and witnessed by the previous county clerk. The diagram showed a protected underground line running from the west well, past the hay shed, under the east pasture, and into the north and south cattle troughs. A thick blue mark crossed the exact ground where Vanessa's contractors had dug their trench. Not close. Not maybe. Exact. I spread the paper flat on the workbench and weighed the corners down with a crescent wrench, a mineral block, and an old coffee mug with my father's initials on it. Then I found the second document, the one that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. An easement addendum recorded when the subdivision land was still part of the old Morrison tract, before Silver Pines existed, before Vanessa ever learned to say community standards with a straight face. It stated, in plain county language, that no residential association, developer, or successor owner could obstruct, relocate, tap, reduce, contaminate, or repurpose the livestock water corridor without written approval from the ranch owner and county agricultural review. I read that sentence 3 times while the generator hummed outside like a guilty man trying not to breathe. Vanessa had not just crossed a property line. She had reached into the bloodstream of the ranch and hooked her vanity project to it. My first call was to Ray Donnelly. He answered on the second ring, voice thick from sleep until I said water easement. Then he was wide awake. Ray had seen enough bad construction jobs in his fire department years to know permits had a smell, and this one smelled rotten. He told me to call Marlene Briggs, the county surveyor, before Vanessa could bury the mistake under more paperwork. My second call went to Marlene's office voicemail, and I left a message so calm it surprised even me. My third call went to Eli Porter, a plumber who had worked with my father back when copper pipe was still cheaper than a dinner out. Eli listened while I described the reducer on the old galvanized line. He did not laugh. He did not curse. He just breathed out through his nose and said, "Caleb, if they tapped that line without a backflow preventer, they may have turned their pool into evidence." Evidence. That word landed clean. I walked outside with the flashlight and followed the disturbed dirt from the pool trench to the valve box. The moon made the limestone pavers shine pale and expensive. A temporary sign leaned against the glass fence, printed in gold letters for Saturday's opening. Beyond it, the pool light glowed blue under the surface, pretty as a lie. I crouched beside the red-handled valve and rested my palm on the metal. It was warm from the day and gritty with dust. My father had painted that handle red so nobody would miss it in tall grass. Vanessa had missed it anyway. Or worse, she had seen it and assumed anything old was weak. I stood there listening to water move where it did not belong, and for the first time since I saw the torn fence, my anger cooled into something useful. I took pictures of everything. The cut posts, the open junction box, the new pipe, the map, the permit number on the contractor trailer, the pool glowing in my pasture like stolen jewelry. Then I locked the file box, set it on the passenger seat of my truck, and drove toward town under a sky full of hard white stars. Vanessa wanted a paper fight. My family had been ready for one since 1989. The county courthouse opened at 8, but I was sitting in the parking lot by 7:15 with a thermos of black coffee, the green file box on the passenger seat, and dried Pasture mud still crusted on my boots. The building was nothing fancy, just brick, glass doors, and a flag popping in the morning wind, but to me it felt heavier than any courtroom on television. This was where land stopped being opinion and became record. Inside, the air smelled like floor wax, old paper, and burnt coffee from a machine that had probably been disappointing people since the 90s. Marlene Briggs met me at the records counter with silver hair pinned tight, reading glasses hanging from a chain, and the kind of stare that could measure a fence line from across a room. She had surveyed half the county and remembered every corner pin like other people remember birthdays. I laid my father's documents on the counter. She did not speak for a while. She just slid each page under the lamp, checked the stamps, followed the blue water line with one careful finger, then looked up at me over her glasses. "Caleb," she said, "whoever gave Silver Pines that map either did not check the county record or hoped nobody else would." That was the first clean breath I had taken in 2 days. By 9:30, Marlene had pulled the original subdivision plat from storage. The map was wide enough that we had to spread it across a conference table. There was Silver Pines, neat little lots and cul-de-sacs drawn in black ink. And there was my ranch boundary, thick and stubborn, running exactly where my torn fence had stood. No buffer zone, no amenity corridor, no shared transition space. Just my land, my easement, and a recorded note in the margin protecting agricultural water access. Marlene tapped that note with her pen. "This cannot be changed by a homeowners association letter," she said. "This would require your written consent, county review, and a recorded amendment." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vanessa had built her entire little kingdom on a laminated lie. By noon, I was walking the pasture with Marlene, Eli Porter, and Hank Wallace from the county agricultural office. Hank wore a sweat-stained hat, carried a clipboard, and had the calm voice of a man who had spent decades telling people their expensive mistakes were still mistakes. Vanessa was already there, of course, standing beside the glass fence with 2 board members and a contractor in a polo shirt. Her smile faltered when she saw the county truck. Not much, but enough. The air around the pool shimmered with heat. The pump clicked on, and the white pipe trembled where it disappeared into the trench. Eli crouched by the valve box, wiped dirt from the connection, and let out a low whistle. He pointed to the reducer, the missing backflow protection, the fresh tool marks on the old fitting. Hank took photographs without saying a word. Marlene walked 20 paces east, drove a temporary survey flag into the ground, then walked the line south, placing another and another. Each orange flag landed like a nail in Vanessa's story. She tried to interrupt, using words like misunderstanding, emergency beautification, and preliminary boundary interpretation. Hank finally looked at her and said, "Ma'am, a pool is not an agricultural use. A recreational pump tied into a livestock corridor is not a beautification issue. And this ground is not yours." The silence after that was so sharp I could hear flies ticking against the glass fence. Vanessa's contractor suddenly became very interested in his shoes. One board member stepped backward like the property line itself might stain him. Vanessa turned to me, her sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the tightness in her mouth. "Caleb," she said, "surely we can resolve this before Saturday." Saturday, her opening day. The printed sign still leaned near the gate, promising refreshments, community wellness, and guided tours. I looked at the blue water sitting in my pasture, at the pipes stealing from my cattle, at the old red valve beside the hay shed. Then I looked back at Hank. I asked one question, plain and careful. "If I restore the livestock line to its recorded use, am I within my rights?" Hank checked the easement, then the connection, then nodded once. "As long as you do not damage their equipment beyond ordinary disconnection from your system, you can operate your agricultural water line." Eli's eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time all day, I saw the smallest grin under his gray mustache. Vanessa did not understand what had just happened. She still thought the fight was about stopping her pool. It was not. The pool was already sitting on my land, attached to my water, inside my easement. All I had to do was let the ranch do what it had been legally designed to do. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing everything slowly, cleanly, and in front of witnesses. Eli installed a proper isolation fitting on my side. Hank documented the flow meter. Marlene marked the boundary in photographs. Ray Donnelly stood near the gate with his phone, recording the whole process like a man who had waited years to see arrogance meet paperwork. Just before sunset, I walked to the red-handled valve. The metal felt rough under my palm. Vanessa watched from beside her Lexus, no longer smiling. I did not say anything dramatic. I did not need to. I turned the handle a quarter turn, heard the old line shudder awake beneath the ground, and listened as water remembered where it belonged. By midnight, the ranch had gone still again, but it was not the same stillness as before. This time, there was purpose under it. The old water line hummed beneath the dirt in a low, steady pulse, feeding through the lawful side of the system, while Eli's new isolation fitting kept the pool equipment from touching anything it was not supposed to touch. We did not drain anything. We did not break anything. We simply restored the agricultural flow Vanessa's crew had interrupted, and the moment that happened, the whole construction site started telling the truth. The pool pump had been designed to pull and push water for crystal blue leisure. My father's system had been designed to move water to livestock troughs. When the connection changed back to legal use, the pressure found the path it had always known. By 2 in the morning, the south trough was filling with a clean metallic rush that sounded better than any song on the radio. I stood beside it with Ray Donnelly, both of us holding flashlights while moths battered themselves against the beams. The cattle came in slowly at first, dark shapes moving through the moonlit pasture, hooves pressing soft into damp grass. Then the first cow lowered her head and drank. Then another. Then 20. Then the whole herd gathered in that quiet, patient way cattle do, shoulder to shoulder under the stars, steam rising off their backs in the cool hours before dawn. The smell of chlorine was faint now, mixed with mud and alfalfa and warm hide, but it was still there, sharp enough to remind me where the water had been sitting before it came home. Ray took off his cap and scratched his head. "Well," he said, "I have seen a lot in this county, but I have never seen a resort amenity become a ranch improvement overnight." I almost smiled. Almost. Across the pasture, Vanessa's pool lights still glowed pale blue behind the glass fence, but the water line had dropped enough to leave a clean ring around the tile. It looked embarrassed. The fancy lounge chairs were still wrapped in plastic. The gold-lettered opening sign leaned crooked near the gate. Somewhere inside Silver Pines, I knew Vanessa was sleeping under air conditioning, probably confident her lawyers would smooth everything over by morning. People like her always think morning belongs to them. They forget ranchers wake up first. At 4:40, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marlene Briggs. County stop work notice prepared, sheriff copied, agricultural office copied, hearing request logged. At 5:10, Hank Wallace sent photographs from his report with one line underneath. Unauthorized connection confirmed. At 5:30, Eli poured coffee from a dented thermos and checked the flow meter one more time. The numbers were beautiful. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Just gallons moving where the county record said gallons were allowed to move. That is the thing about real proof. It does not need to raise its voice. It just sits there, accurate and patient, while lies tire themselves out. The sun started lifting behind the cottonwoods at 6:12, turning every wet blade of grass copper. The cattle were still drinking when the first car rolled in from Silver Pines. Then another. Then 3 golf carts, 1 landscaping truck, and finally Vanessa's white Lexus, clean as a porcelain plate and moving too fast for gravel. She stepped out wearing a white blouse and holding her phone like a weapon. For half a second, she did not speak. She just stared at the pool, then at the pipe, then at the herd lined up at the troughs as if they had been invited to the grand opening. Her mouth opened, but the pump beat her to it, coughing once as the system equalized. Water rushed into the trough with a bright hollow sound. One of my older cows lifted her head, water dripping from her muzzle, and looked straight at Vanessa like she was the one trespassing. Behind Vanessa, her board members climbed out of their golf carts in pressed polo shirts and stunned silence. One woman whispered, "Is that our pool water?" Vanessa spun toward me, cheeks flushed, voice cracking around the edges. "Caleb, what have you done?" I held up the county-stamped easement, still inside a clear plastic sleeve, the morning light, flashing across my father's old signature. I did not step closer. I did not need to. "I restored my livestock water line," I said. "The same one your contractors illegally tapped." She looked from the paper to the cattle, from the cattle to the half-lowered pool, and for the first time since I had known her, Vanessa Caldwell had no polished sentence ready. Then the sheriff's cruiser turned off the county road, followed by Marlene's truck and Hank's county vehicle. Dust rose behind them in a slow golden cloud. Vanessa saw them coming, and all that expensive confidence drained out of her face faster than the water had drained from her dream. The sheriff's cruiser stopped beside the torn fence line, and the dust rolled past it in a slow brown sheet. Deputy Harris stepped out first, the same young deputy who had called it a civil dispute 2 days earlier. This morning, he did not look bored or uncertain. He looked at the orange survey flags, the exposed connection, the lowered pool, the cattle troughs running full, and then he looked at Vanessa like the morning had handed him a very different file. Marlene Briggs came next, carrying the original plat in a hard plastic tube. Hank Wallace walked with his clipboard already open, hat brim low against the sun. Behind them, Ray kept filming from the gate, quiet as a fence post. Vanessa recovered just enough to try the voice again. That syrupy community leader voice polished smooth for meetings and ribbon cuttings. Deputy, this man has interfered with a permitted neighborhood facility. We have homeowners arriving any minute. The sheriff held up one hand. Not harsh, just final. Ma'am, we are going to start with property access. Are you aware you are standing on recorded Whitaker Ranch land? Her lips tightened. That is disputed. Marlene stepped forward and uncapped her tube. No, it is not. She spread the county plat across the hood of Hank's truck, pinning the corners with a tape measure, a glove, and my old crescent wrench. The paper crackled in the morning air. The black boundary line ran clean and plain, exactly where my grandfather had set it, exactly where my fence had stood before Vanessa's crew pulled it down. Marlene pointed to the margin note, then to the blue-marked easement overlay she had printed from county records. This agricultural water corridor predates Silver Pines by decades. No recorded amendment exists. No consent from the landowner exists. No county review exists. Vanessa's board members went very still. The woman who had whispered about the pool water took one step away from the glass fence. Hank walked to the open valve box and read from his report in the calmest voice I had ever heard. Unauthorized excavation inside protected agricultural service area. Unauthorized connection to livestock water infrastructure. No approved backflow protection at time of inspection. Potential contamination risk created by recreational water equipment. Improper alteration of fence and access control. Every sentence landed without drama. That made it worse for Vanessa. She could argue with anger. She could perform against outrage. She had no idea what to do with plain facts. She turned on the contractor. Tell them you had the permits. The foreman swallowed. We had a work order from the association. She said the boundary was cleared. Deputy Harris wrote that down. Vanessa's face changed when she saw the pen moving. Not fear exactly. More like the first cold realization that paper could cut both directions. Then the homeowners arrived for the opening. They came in golf carts and sport utility vehicles, dressed in clean summer clothes, carrying coffee cups and little gift bags. They expected music, towels, maybe a speech about wellness and property values. Instead, they found county officials standing in a ranch pasture while 200 cattle drank from the system their dues had apparently paid to disturb. The gold-lettered sign still promised a grand community experience. One of my steers flicked mud onto the base of it with his tail. I heard somebody laugh once, then stop quickly. Vanessa tried to gather herself. This is a temporary misunderstanding, she announced, turning toward the crowd. Silver Pines has acted in good faith. I took the certified notice from my folder and handed it to Deputy Harris, who handed it to her. Her fingers shook just enough to wrinkle the corner. It ordered all work stopped, all equipment removed pending review, and all unauthorized personnel to leave Whitaker Ranch property. Hank added that the agricultural office would be seeking restitution for water system interference and soil disturbance. Marlene informed the board that the altered plat Vanessa had circulated was not recognized by the county and would be referred for review. The word review did something to the crowd. People understand fines. They understand delays. But review means someone is going to open drawers, compare signatures, follow invoices, and ask why expensive lies were printed on glossy paper. Vanessa looked at me then. Really looked. Not like an obstacle, not like a stubborn rancher blocking her view, but like a man whose name had been on the record the whole time. Caleb, she said quietly, we can settle this privately. The trough nearest us filled to the brim and spilled over, water running through the grass around my boots. I could smell wet earth, chlorine fading, cattle, diesel, and the clean sharp edge of morning. I thought about my father labeling folders under a bare bulb. I thought about my grandfather setting cedar posts before any of these streets existed. I looked at the pool sitting half empty behind glass, expensive and useless, and then at my herd drinking steady under the rising sun. We are settling it, I said. Just not privately. The stop work order stayed clipped to the glass fence for 3 days, fluttering in the Oklahoma wind like a white flag Vanessa refused to recognize. By the end of the week, The pool company had pulled its equipment off my pasture, slowly and carefully, under the eyes of the county and the sheriff's office. The limestone pallets went first, then the lounge chairs, still wrapped in plastic. Then the temporary sign with the gold letters came down and left two pale rectangles in the grass where its legs had pressed into the mud. Nobody cheered. Ranch work does not stop for victory. Cattle still needed feed. Fence still needed repair. The trough still needed cleaning after all that stirred-up water. But every time I walked past that red-handled valve, I felt something settle in my chest that had been tight since the day I smelled wet concrete on my land. The review moved faster than Vanessa expected. County records showed the so-called plat clarification had never been accepted, never been recorded, and never been approved by anyone with authority to move a ranch boundary. The private survey company admitted they had relied on materials provided by the Silver Pines Board. The contractor produced emails where Vanessa described my east pasture as a future amenity parcel and told them access had been cleared. Cleared. That was the word she had used for my fence, my water line, my grass, my family's ground. By the time the HOA held its emergency meeting, half the neighborhood already knew more than Vanessa wanted them to know. Ray's video had made its way through text messages, church groups, feed stores, and every diner counter within 15 miles. It showed the facts cleanly. County plat on the truck hood, cattle drinking, Vanessa holding the notice, and that expensive pool sitting quiet behind glass with nothing to say for itself. I did not attend the meeting. I had no interest in watching people pretend they were shocked by the kind of behavior they had rewarded for years. Marlene told me later that Vanessa resigned before they could vote her out. Hank said the agricultural office assessed costs for water system interference, pasture restoration, and inspection expenses. My attorney, the second one, the good one, handled the civil side. Silver Pines paid to rebuild the fence, restore the soil, remove the pool structure, replace the damaged pipe, and compensate the ranch for unauthorized water use. Vanessa's real estate license went under formal review, and the board treasurer started answering questions about how community funds had been approved for construction on land the HOA did not own. Funny thing about daylight. It does not argue either. It just shows what was already there. A month later, the pasture looked rough, but alive. New posts stood straight along the boundary, cedar and steel, sunk deep enough to outlast gossip. The disturbed ground had been reseeded. Eli helped me keep part of the upgraded pump assembly legally separated from anything Silver Pines ever touched and tied it into a new trough station for the herd. It was not pretty. It was better than pretty. It worked. The first morning after we finished, I stood there before sunrise with coffee in one hand and my father's old cap in the other. The air smelled like damp earth, hay, and the clean mineral scent of well water. No perfume. No fresh concrete. No speech about community standards. Just cattle moving through the gray light, hooves soft in the grass, lowering their heads to drink from a system my family had protected on paper long before Vanessa tried to improve the view. My daughter Emily came out with her jacket zipped to her chin and leaned against the gate beside me. She looked at the trough, then at the new fence, then at the place where the pool had been. She asked if I missed seeing Vanessa's face when the county read the order. I told her no. The best part was not watching Vanessa lose. The best part was watching the land keep its promise. My father used to say you never really own a ranch. You hold it, work it, defend it when you have to, and pass it on less wounded than you found it. I understand that now more than I ever did. Vanessa thought power was a folder, a title, a glossy map, and a clean signature at the bottom of a lie. She thought old fences meant weak owners, and open pasture meant empty space. She never understood that land remembers. Water remembers. Paper remembers. And when all three line up, justice does not need to shout. It can sound like a pump humming at dawn, a gate swinging shut, and 200 head of cattle drinking steady under the Oklahoma sky.